The town lay under the wash of a sinking sun, the sky a smear of amber and rose, the wind stirring dust along the wooden boardwalks like whispered secrets. Each plank creaked beneath the feet of a town half forgotten by the world beyond the desert. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, carrying the scent of wood and stew, a promise of warmth in the cooling air. In the heart of this town, by a cabin whose logs bore the memory of storms and quiet years alike, a man crouched beside a small fire. His hands, roughened by labor, moved with deliberate care as he stirred a pot of stew. Steam rose, curling and twisting, carrying the aroma of simmered beans, dried herbs, and the faintest trace of meat. The man did not hurry, and in his stillness there was a kind of reverence for the simple act of feeding another. He was a quiet man, not for want of speech, but because he had learned that the world often listened better to silence. His eyes, the color of washed-out denim, followed the horizon where the sun kissed the jagged cliffs, and he breathed the warmth of the fire into his chest, letting it mingle with the cooling desert air. The townsfolk moved about their evening chores, some pausing to glance at him as they passed. Children lingered on the edges of the boardwalk, their bare toes brushing the dust, curious and wary, drawn by the smoke and the soft light. The town was small, stitched together by necessity more than by choice. Everyone knew one another's name, yet no one truly knew the weight each carried. And then he appeared. From a heat-shimmered horizon came a figure that made the dust bend around him, a man, or perhaps something more, whose frame seemed taller than any the town had ever seen. His clothes hung in tatters, wind-tossed, and his boots stirred the dust in clouds that clung to him like a second skin. He moved with the weariness of one who has wandered longer than the roads remember, but with a quiet purpose, as if the earth itself had guided him here. The town held its breath. Mothers drew their children close. Shopkeepers peered from behind half-closed shutters. Even the wind seemed to pause in respect or in suspicion. The giant stranger stopped a few paces from a cabin. He did not speak. He did not demand. He simply looked, eyes shadowed beneath a brimmed hat, and the man by the fire, sensing something neither hostile nor benign, rose slowly. He carried nothing but the pot and the quiet courage of a heart that had learned that kindness could be stronger than fear. He stirred the stew once more, letting the wooden spoon scrape the bottom of the pot as if calling attention to the offering. Then he spoke, voice soft, roughened by wind, and words long kept inside. "Here, if you're hungry." The stranger tilted his head, a gesture almost imperceptible, but in it there was acknowledgement, and something softer, a recognition that he had found, for a moment, a respite from the long roads and the endless nights. He stepped closer, and the man stepped back slightly, making room without haste. And then, in silence, they ate. The town watched. Whispers rose, hesitant and trembling, as the children's laughter, quiet, breathless, danced across the dusty streets. No one intervened. No one could, really, for there was a weight to this moment, a truth that hovered between the two men, invisible yet undeniable. It was the simplest of truths, one human giving to another, without question, without condition. The sun slipped lower, leaving a halo of violet across the cliffs, and still they shared the stew. Each bite carried not just nourishment, but an unspoken understanding that life could be kinder than the world often let on. The man by the fire noticed small details, the way the stranger's hands trembled slightly, the way his eyes softened when he looked at the horizon, the subtle tension in his shoulders that spoke of long-fought battles no one had seen. And he did not ask. He merely offered what he could: food, warmth, presence. A dog, ragged and thin, appeared from the shadows of a nearby stable. It patted silently, cautious, and received a scrap tossed gently by the man by the fire. The giant watched, a small, almost imperceptible smile forming beneath his beard. It was a smile born of recognition. Kindness often traveled in small, quiet ways, and it could be contagious. The wind whispered through the town, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the distant river, and the townsfolk began to sense something shift. Fear softened. Curiosity edged forward, tempered by caution. The giant was not violent. He was not a threat, though his size and ragged presence could have convinced anyone otherwise. He was simply a traveler, weary, perhaps lonely, perhaps searching for something he could not yet name. The man by the fire returned to his cooking, adding a few more herbs, letting the aroma mingle with the fading light. He did not speak of where the stranger had come from, nor where he might go. He did not ask. Sometimes, he thought, the world spoke loudest in silence, and understanding came not from questions, but from shared moments. Evening deepened. Shadows stretched across the town like ink on parchment, and the first stars pricked the sky with cold fire. The stranger finally looked up from his plate, eyes meeting the man's with a depth that spoke of untold stories, of journeys marked by hardship, of battles fought both outwardly and inwardly. In that gaze, the man by the fire saw not a threat, nor an enigma, but a reflection of his own quiet resilience. No one came forward. No one dared disturb this fragile, unspoken covenant of trust. The wind carried the faint hum of a distant song, a lullaby perhaps, or merely the sigh of the earth itself, as night claimed the town. The two men lingered in the glow of the dying fire, sharing warmth and sustenance in a way that would ripple outward quietly, like a stone dropped into a still pond. By the time the stars had fully claimed the sky, the town had begun to understand, in a whispering, almost reluctant way, that something remarkable had entered their midst. A giant stranger, ragged and imposing, had not brought violence or fear. He had brought presence, and he had met presence with kindness. And sometimes they realized that was enough to change everything. The night settled in, cool and deep, wrapping the town and its people in the soft hush of anticipation. Somewhere in the distance, the hoot of an owl punctuated the silence, and the man by the fire leaned back, watching the giant stranger. Perhaps he would move on come morning. Perhaps he would stay. For now, he was here, and that was enough. And in the quiet of that twilight, the town began to dream, ever so subtly, of a story yet to unfold. A story of courage, humility, and the unexpected ways that human hearts could intersect quietly, without fanfare, without demand, but with a resonance that would echo far beyond the boundaries of dust and wood and wind. The fire flickered low, the wind whispered soft secrets, and the man by the fire wondered, as he often did in moments such as this, whether the world had always intended for such gentle connections to carry the weight of legends. Perhaps it had. Perhaps it always did. And perhaps, in the slow unfolding of days yet to come, this small act of shared stew, shared warmth, would become the seed of something extraordinary. Morning arrived like a slow sigh, the horizon spilling soft gold across the jagged cliffs, the town stirring awake under a haze of dusty light. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and wood smoke, and the streets, though quiet, hummed with subtle life. The scrape of boots, the distant clatter of wagon wheels, the chatter of children making their way to school. The man by the fire had risen before the sun, as he often did, and was already tending to the stew pot, now simmering over a gentle flame. The ragged giant stood nearby, watching the horizon in a way that suggested he had been seeing more than the desert. He had been seeing time itself, stretching and folding like the folds of his worn coat. They did not speak at first. Words were unnecessary. There was an understanding in silence, a language woven from gestures, from shared presence. The man handed him a bowl, and the giant accepted it with a slow nod, the weight of gratitude heavy in his eyes, though no words passed between them. Children lingered on the edge of the boardwalk, captivated by the sight of the two men eating together, curious yet hesitant. The youngest, a girl with sun-bleached hair and a patchwork dress, crept closer, her bare toes stirring dust. She giggled softly when the dog, now a familiar companion to the stranger, brushed past her legs. The giant's eyes softened further, and a corner of his mouth lifted in a ghost of a smile, fleeting yet luminous. In those quiet mornings, they began to learn the rhythms of each other's hearts. The man by the fire spoke little of his past, yet the giant seemed to perceive it anyway. The subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze lingered on empty spaces, as though expecting someone to appear and never finding them. The giant, in turn, offered fragments of himself, not in stories, but in actions, a careful placement of firewood, a hand extended without pressure, a presence so solid it felt like shelter. The town began to notice these quiet exchanges. Some whispered admiration, some suspicion. A shopkeeper, leaning against the frame of his door, muttered to no one in particular, noting the way the stranger helped the children, the way the old clockmaker's gate, stubborn and creaking, swung open with the giant's quiet assistance. Even the skeptical cowhands, rough and wary, paused in their routines, sensing something rare and unspoken, something that made the air itself feel heavier with possibility. One evening, under the coppered light of sunset, the giant and the man walked the edge of town, the dust crunching beneath their boots. The giant's movements, though massive, were careful, deliberate, almost poetic in their restraint. He stooped to examine a broken fence post, lifting it with ease, repairing it with hands that had once held swords, now softened by gentleness. The man by the fire watched him, a quiet understanding blooming between them like wildflowers along the cliffside. This giant, so ragged and imposing, carried a strength that was not loud or boastful. It was strength tempered by patience, by compassion, by a refusal to harm without cause. In the soft hush of evening, they found themselves beside the river, its waters reflecting the violet and gold of the sky. The man tossed pebbles into the current, watching ripples form and vanish. The giant mimicked him, careful not to splash, his eyes tracing the path of each stone as though following memories he could not name. And then, as night settled and the stars prickled the sky like distant lanterns, the giant spoke for the first time in fragments, words heavy with memory, yet careful not to intrude. "I have walked far." The man by the fire nodded, understanding that the journey was both literal and more than literal. Some paths, once taken, never fully released their travelers. The giant did not say where he had come from, nor where he would go. He did not boast of battles fought or victories earned, but in the way he carried himself, in the quiet intensity of his gaze, the man understood that this stranger had seen worlds few dared to imagine, had carried burdens that bent even the strongest shoulders. And yet here he was, sitting by a small fire, eating simple stew. Here he was, allowing himself to be human again. The bond between them deepened, not through dramatic acts, but through the slow, deliberate attention to small things. The careful stoking of the fire, the sharing of water, the silent observation of stars that mirrored the quiet of their hearts. Side characters began to weave into this new rhythm. The skeptical villager who once muttered warnings now lingered at a distance, curiosity softening suspicion. The clockmaker, an elderly man with trembling hands, watched the giant repair his gate, and for the first time in years, allowed himself a smile that did not hide behind a beard of worry. The children, daring to approach, found courage in the giant's gentleness, and a quiet magic began to thread through the dusty town. One evening, a storm rolled over the cliffs. Rain fell in silver sheets, lightning carving the sky into jagged patterns of brilliance. The man by the fire and the giant huddled under the lean-to roof, watching the water run in rivulets along the streets. The giant's hands, rough and worn, sheltered the children who had taken refuge nearby. They whispered in awe, their voices small against the roar of the storm, but full of trust. In that moment, the man realized that courage was not always loud or visible. Sometimes courage was in showing up, in offering safety, in quiet acts of generosity that could ripple outward and transform the world. The giant, in protecting these small lives without fanfare, was teaching him this lesson, and the lesson settled in his chest like a warm stone. As the storm passed, the sun returned, painting the streets with washed gold. The giant, who had seemed an enigma, now bore the quiet dignity of one who had chosen a different path. Not domination, Not fear, but the steady, patient act of being present where it mattered most. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the town began to shift. Conversations softened, glances became warmer, and the fear that had once marked the streets gave way to something more fragile, more beautiful: hope. The man by the fire and the giant shared a final moment before night fully claimed the town. They stood side by side, the fire's glow reflecting on their faces, and though words were scarce, there was a richness in the silence. In that quiet communion, they knew that what had begun with a simple act of shared stew had grown into something unspoken yet profound. Trust, understanding, friendship. And the giant, once a figure of fear and mystery, now seemed like a part of the town itself, a living testament to the power of gentle strength and the unexpected ways hearts could connect. Night fell, soft and forgiving, wrapping the town in a velvet hush. The stars, steady and distant, watched over them. The man by the fire felt a warmth that had little to do with the flames. In the presence of this ragged giant, he had glimpsed a truth often overlooked: that courage and kindness were not opposites, that strength could reside in gentleness, and that even the most weary traveler could find a place to rest without judgment. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called, and the sound echoed across the cliffs like a lullaby for the soul. The dog, now curled at the giant's feet, twitched in sleep, dreams filled with the simplicity of care and the comfort of companionship. And as the man by the fire closed his eyes, he thought, perhaps the world was always full of such moments, if only one had the patience to notice. For in the slow unfolding of quiet days, bonds forged in silence could become the strongest of all. The mornings grew cooler, the horizon brushed with silver mist as autumn edged into the town. Shadows lengthened along the wooden walkways, curling around doors and windows as if they, too, were listening to the whispers of what had begun to stir. Word of the ragged giant traveled like wind through the streets, slow, persistent, impossible to ignore. Some spoke of awe. Mothers told children of a protector who walked in silence, whose presence seemed to hush storms. Shopkeepers, once wary of the man by the fire, now paused in their tasks, glancing toward the cabin where the giant's shadow stretched long and steady. Others murmured with suspicion. Fear is a loyal companion in a small town, and it traveled faster than admiration. Tales of a wanderer who could move mountains with his hands, or silence a room with a glance, twisted with each retelling. The man by the fire noticed the change, but did not speak of it. Rumors, like seeds, took root in the soil they were planted in, but he chose to water only the kindness he could give. The giant, too, seemed unconcerned by the stories, yet sometimes, when no one watched, his gaze darkened for a moment, recalling battles fought in lands the town could scarcely imagine. His silence was not absence, but weight, a quiet reminder that even legends carry scars. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cliffs in molten gold, the wind brought a scent unfamiliar and sharp, the distant tang of iron and leather, of many horses' hooves pounding the earth in measured rhythm. The town paused, every sound magnified in the sudden hush. The creak of doors, the clatter of a stray tin pot, the soft whimper of the children's dog. From the ridge above, dust clouds rose like smoke signals of intent. Hundreds of riders appeared, silhouettes dark against the fading light, their banners catching the last rays of sun. The town held its breath. Fear rippled, tentative and trembling, along the boardwalks and alleyways. The man by the fire and the giant exchanged no words, yet understanding passed between them like an electric current. They knew these riders were not ordinary travelers. They had felt the undercurrent of something vast and unspoken, a force beyond the horizon. And yet there was no panic, only preparation, the quieting of hearts, the steadying of breath. Side characters, the clockmaker, the skeptical villager, even the children, watched from windows and behind barrels, each sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The town itself seemed to hold still, as if the earth had paused, waiting to see which way the story would lean. That night, The man by the fire and the giant sat by their small flame, plotting no violence but offering strategy. They would not fight without reason, but they would not surrender their town to fear. Each action was measured, deliberate, chosen with the care of someone who knew that strength was more than muscle. It was restraint, patience, and quiet courage. As darkness settled over the streets, the giant finally spoke, his voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. They come because they know, or because they hope. The man by the fire nodded, stirring the pot of stew one last time. He understood the words. Though they carried layers of meaning, he could only partially unravel. The giant's past, hinted at in the scars lining his hands and the weight in his eyes, suggested he had faced far greater odds than a small town of whispers and dust. Yet here, he chose not to dominate, but to protect. Rumors in the town, however, had already done their work. People who had once dismissed the giant now whispered of his deeds with reverence. Others, emboldened by fear, imagined threats where none existed. And the children, as always, watched with wide eyes, sensing truth in the quiet moments between adults, understanding that the story unfolding was larger than themselves, yet entirely accessible through courage and kindness. The night air grew colder, carrying the faint scent of rain from distant hills. And yet, the tension in the town was not born of storms alone. It was the anticipation of change, of something unknown approaching. The man by the fire leaned back, studying the giant beside him, and for a moment, the weight of possibility seemed to press against their shoulders. It was not the warriors on the ridge that troubled him most. It was the realization that even in acts of quiet kindness, the world might test the heart, demand proof, or challenge the fragile trust they had built. And still, the giant remained calm, an anchor of presence in a town teetering on the edge of fear and wonder. His hands rested lightly on the hilt of a tool he did not wield as a weapon, but as a promise. That protection did not require aggression, and that true courage often revealed itself in restraint. Hours passed, the wind sighing through the cliffs, carrying whispers of old songs. Songs the giant must have known once, in places far from dust and timber. His gaze lingered on the horizon, tracing the riders in the distance, yet he did not flinch. By dawn, the riders had drawn closer, and the town had awakened fully to the spectacle. But instead of panic, there was quiet resolve. The man by the fire walked among the villagers, offering guidance and reassurance, small gestures that stitched courage into the hearts of those who had once feared. The giant, silent yet immense, took his place beside the town's center, not as a conqueror, but as a sentinel. A single child approached, hands full of wildflowers, and placed them at the giant's feet. He knelt, gently touching each bloom, and in that moment, even the approaching riders could not disturb the fragile beauty of trust formed in silence. The riders, hundreds in number, slowed as they drew near, and for the first time, the town glimpsed a truth that would have been impossible to comprehend in any ordinary telling. The giant's presence did not merely ward off threats, it commanded respect. And the man by the fire, with his quiet bravery and unwavering kindness, had done something more extraordinary than any battle could achieve. He had drawn loyalty and admiration not through fear, but through humanity. And still, the story was not over. Tension rippled along the boardwalks, each footstep of the approaching riders echoing like a drumbeat in the chest of the town. The man by the fire felt the weight of their gaze, the weight of expectation, and he met it not with boast or bravado, but with the calm assurance of someone who knew the power of patience and the quiet strength of a heart willing to care. In the stillness, the giant turned slightly, eyes meeting his companions with a faint glimmer of understanding. They had come to test more than walls or gates. They had come to see whether the spirit of the town, fragile yet steadfast, could endure. And in that moment, the man by the fire understood the truth that had guided him all along. Courage and kindness were not opposites. They were allies, and together they could shape destinies. Night fell once more, heavy with anticipation, yet the town no longer trembled in fear. The whispers of doubt persisted, yes, but beneath them ran a quiet current of hope. The giant, immense yet gentle, stood sentinel under the stars, and the man by the fire, steady and unshaken, knew that whatever dawn brought, they had already begun to alter the course of more than one life. For in the rising tension, the threat looming just beyond sight, there existed a quiet certainty that even in the face of unknown odds, the smallest acts of courage and generosity could ripple outward, reshaping the hearts of those who witnessed them. And in that anticipation, the town slept, clinging to the warmth of firelight and the memory of a simple stew shared on a dusty evening, a memory that would soon blossom into legend. The first light of dawn painted the cliffs in shades of rose and gold, soft enough to make the rugged edges of the town appear almost gentle. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sage and dew, and the streets lay quiet, awaiting the day that had promised both reckoning and revelation. From the ridge above, the dust stirred again, but not with menace. Hundreds of riders approached, their banners glinting in the morning sun, but the weight in their formation was not of threat, it was reverence. Their hooves struck the earth in measured rhythm, and the wind carried the low murmur of acknowledgment, a resonance that spoke of history, of loyalty, and of unspoken oaths kept for decades. The townspeople, roused from their early chores, stepped into the streets, wide-eyed and trembling, not from fear but from awe. The man by the fire stood at the center of the town, a quiet anchor amidst the gathering tide, while the giant stood beside him, tall and ragged, yet emanating a presence that made even the banners bow in respect. The riders halted at the edge of the town, and one by one dismounted. Their movements were deliberate, measured, ceremonial. Children peered from behind barrels, their eyes wide with wonder. Mothers held their babies close, their breaths caught in disbelief. Even the most skeptical villagers felt their hearts shift, understanding that what they were witnessing was not merely a parade of men on horseback. It was recognition, honor given where it was due, long overdue. The giant, whose past had been shrouded in mystery, now revealed the quiet weight he had carried all these years. Once a legendary warrior, known across lands that stretched far beyond the horizon, he had chosen a path of humility, seeking refuge from battles and the endless cycle of violence. And here, in this dusty town, his reputation had preceded him, yet he had come not for power or glory, but for something far rarer: connection, trust, and the shared warmth of human kindness. The leader of the riders, a figure cloaked in time and experience, approached the man by the fire. He bowed, not with arrogance or ceremony, but with the deep respect owed to someone who had proven courage in ways invisible to most eyes. "You have shown him the way," the leader said softly, gesturing to the giant, "and in doing so, you have shown us all the strength that comes from compassion." The town held its breath. The man by the fire nodded, words unnecessary. He had learned long ago that action often spoke louder than proclamation, that a shared meal could ripple outward in a legend, and that the gentle heart sometimes bore the heaviest crown. The riders, 100 strong, knelt in unison, not as conquerors, but as witnesses. They bowed to the man by the fire first, and then to the giant beside him, acknowledging bravery unmarked by swords, courage unrecorded by the annals of war. The street shimmered with quiet power, the kind that transforms ordinary lives into stories whispered across generations. Children scattered forward, placing wildflowers at their feet. The dog barked, joyous, tail wagging, bridging the solemnity with simple delight. The clockmaker, the skeptical villager, and even the shopkeepers felt the enormity of the moment settle into their hearts. The town, once afraid of the unknown, now understood that true strength was measured not in fear or control, but in kindness, humility, and steadfastness. The man by the fire stepped forward, voice low, carrying over the quiet murmurs of the warriors. "It is not the sword, nor the size of one's hands, nor the armor we wear, that makes courage. It is the heart, and the choice to stand gentle in a world that often prizes harshness. The giant nodded, a small, rare smile lifting his weary face. For once, he felt unburdened, the weight of past battles dissipating into the golden light. Here, at last, was acknowledgment without demand, respect without fear. The riders remounted, raising their banners high, not as symbols of conquest, but as a chorus of honor and allegiance. They would carry the tale of this town, this man, and this giant far beyond the cliffs and the rivers and the roads that led into deserts unknown. The townspeople erupted in soft applause, a chorus of wonder and joy. Children laughed freely, their voices carrying over rooftops. Mothers wiped tears from their eyes, and even the oldest men, stooped and creased with years, felt the echo of a lesson long forgotten. But the quiet acts of love and courage leave traces that no one, not even time itself, can erase. And in the warmth of the morning sun, the man by the fire and the giant stood side by side, their eyes meeting briefly. No words were necessary. The bond between them, forged in silence, had now become legend. As the wind swept through the town, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and dust, the man addressed the people gathered in the streets, his voice carrying a quiet invitation. Remember this, and carry it with you. Kindness is never wasted. Courage is never silent. And even the smallest gesture, given with a full heart, can ripple farther than you imagine. He paused, letting the words sink into the morning, before speaking again, looking toward the horizon. And to those watching this story unfold, wherever you are, remember that the world changes not always with might, but with the gentleness you offer to another. Share it and let it grow. The townsfolk cheered softly, some laughing, some weeping, all moved. Children ran forward, chasing the shadows of the giant's long legs, the dog barking in playful approval. The giant bent, ruffling hair and patting shoulders, silent gratitude shining in his eyes. The story of that ragged stranger, the man who shared his stew, and the town that witnessed their bond would become more than memory. It would become a lesson, a gentle wind stirring hearts, whispered across deserts, rivers, and hills, carried on the backs of warriors, travelers, and dreamers alike. As the sun climbed higher, painting the town in golden rose, the man by the fire turned to the audience, as if speaking through time itself. This is the truth of courage. This is the gift of kindness. And this is the moment when the ordinary becomes legendary, not because of battles fought, but because hearts met and in meeting understood one another. And somewhere beyond the cliffs, the wind carried the echoes of hoofbeats, laughter, and whispered stories, promising that those who walk with gentle bravery will always find their place, their honor, and the quiet thrill of hearts aligned with goodness. The fire flickered low, the dog stretched and yawned, and the giant, now at peace with the weight of his own story, allowed himself to simply be. Side by side, the two men watched the town awaken fully, the world around them no longer small, no longer fearful, but alive with possibility. And in that stillness, the legend settled, soft as the dust, enduring as the cliffs, eternal as the wind that carried it forth. If this story touched your heart, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and share where you're watching from. Reflect on the kindness and courage you can carry into your own world. Every small act matters, and every gentle heart leaves ripples that outlast even the fiercest storms.